Metamorphoses by Ovid. Written 1 ACE, translated by Sir Samuel Garth, John Dryden, et al. Book the 12th. The Trojan War. Priam, to whom the story was unknown as dead, deplored his metamorphosed son. A cenotaph, his name, and title kept, and Hector round the tomb with all his brothers wept. The pious office Paris did not share, absent alone, an author of the war, which, for the Spartan queen, the Grecians drew, to avenge the rape, and Asia to subdue. 1,000 ships were manned to sail the sea, nor had their just resentments found delay, had not the winds and waves opposed their way. At Aulis with united powers they meet, but there cross winds or calms detain the fleet. Now, while they raise an altar on the shore, and Jove with solemn sacrifice adore, a boding sign the priests and people see. A snake of size immense ascends a tree, and in the leafy summit spied a nest, which o'er her callow young a sparrow pressed. 8 were the birds unfledged, their mother flew, and hovered round her care, but still in view, till the fierce reptile first devoured the brood, then seized the fluttering dam and drunk her blood. This dire ostent the fearful people view. Calchas alone by Phoebus taught foreknew what heaven decreed. With a smiling glance, thus gratulates to Greece her happy chance. O Argives, we shall conquer, Troy is ours, but long delays shall first afflict our powers. 9 years of labor the 9 birds portend. The 10th shall in the town's destruction end. The serpent, who his maw obscene had filled, the branches in his curled embraces held. But, as in spires he stood, he turned to stone. The stony snake retained the figure still his own. Yet not for this, the wind-bound navy weighed, slack were their sails, and Neptune disobeyed. Some thought him loth the town should be destroyed, whose building had his hands divine employed. Not so the seer, who knew and had foreshowed the virgin Phoebe with the virgin's blood must first be reconciled. The common cause prevailed, and pity yielding to the laws, fair Iphigenia, the devoted maid, was by the weeping priests in linen robes arrayed. All mourn her fate, but no relief appeared. The royal victim bound, the knife already reared, when that offended power who caused their woe, relenting, ceased her wrath, and stopped the coming blow. A mist before the minister she cast, and in the virgin's room a hind she placed. The oblation slain, and Phoebe reconciled, a storm was hushed, and dimpled ocean smiled. A favorable gale arose from shore, which to the port desired the Grecian galleys bore. The house of fame. Full in the midst of this created space, betwixt heaven, earth, and skies, there stands a place, confining on all 3 with triple bound, whence all things, though remote, are viewed around, and thither bring their ululating sound. The palace of loud fame, her seat of power, placed on the summit of a lofty tower. 1,000 winding entries, long and wide, receive of fresh reports a flowing tide. 1,000 crannies in the walls are made, nor gate nor bars exclude the busy trade. 'Tis built of brass, the better to diffuse the spreading sounds, and multiply the news. Where echoes in repeated echoes play, a mart forever full, an open night and day. Nor silence is within, nor voice express, but a deaf noise of sounds that never cease, confused and chiding, like the hollow roar of tides receding from the insulted shore, or like the broken thunder heard from far, when Jove at distance drives the rowling war. The courts are filled with tumultuous din of crowds, or issuing forth or entering in, a thoroughfare of news, where some devise things never heard, some mingle truth with lies. The troubled air with empty sounds they beat, intent to hear, eager to repeat. Error sits brooding there with added train of vain credulity, and joys as vain. Suspicion with sedition joined are near, and rumors raised and murmurs mixed, and panic fear. Fame sits aloft and sees the subject ground, and seas about and skies above, enquiring all around. The goddess gives the alarm, and soon is known the Grecian fleet descending on the town. Fixed on defence, the Trojans are not slow to guard their shore from an unexpected foe. They meet in fight. The Hector's fatal hand, Protesolus, falls and bites the strand, which, with expense of blood, the Grecians won, and proved the strength unknown of Priam's son. And to their cost the Trojan leaders felt, the Grecian heroes, and what deaths they dealt. The story of Cygnus. From these first onsets, the Sigean shore was strewed with carcasses and stained with gore. Neptunian Cygnus troops of Greeks had slain. Achilles in his car had scoured the plain, and cleared the Trojan ranks where he fought. Cygnus or Hector through the fields he sought. Cygnus he found, on him his force essayed, for Hector was to the 10th year delayed. His white-maned steeds that bowed beneath the yoke, he cheered to courage with a gentle stroke, then urged his fiery chariot on the foe, and rising shook his lance in act to throw. But first he cried, "O youth, be proud to bear thy death, ennobled by Pelides' spear." The lance pursued the voice without delay, nor did the whizzing weapon miss the way, but pierced his cuirass, with such fury sent, and signed his bosom with a purple dint. At this, the seed of Neptune, goddess born, for ornament, not use, these arms are worn. This helm and heavy buckler I can spare, as only decorations of the war. So Mars is armed for glory, not for need. 'Tis somewhat more from Neptune to proceed, than from a daughter of the sea to spring. Thy sire is mortal, mine is ocean's king. Secure of death, I should contemn thy dart, though naked and impassable depart. He said, and threw. The trembling weapon passed through 9 bull hides, each under other placed, on his broad shield, and stuck within the last. Achilles wrenched it out, and sent again the hostile gift. The hostile gift was vain. He tried a third, a tough, well-chosen spear. The inviolable body stood sincere, though Cygnus then did no defence provide, but, scornful, offered his unshielded side. Not otherwise the impatient hero fared, than as a bull encompassed with a guard. Amid the circus roars, provoked from far by sigh of scarlet and a sanguine war, they quit their ground, his bended hordes elude, in vain pursuing, and in vain pursued. Before to farther flight he would advance, he stood considering and surveyed his lance. Doubts if he wielded not a wooden spear without a point. He looked, the point was there. "This is my hand, and this my lance," he said, "by which so many thousand foes are dead. Oh, whither is their usual virtue fled? I had it once, and the Lernician wall and Tenedos confessed it in their fall. Thy streams, Caecus, rawled a crimson flood, and Thebes ran red with her own natives' blood. Twice Telephus employed their piercing steel, to wound him first, and afterward to heal. The vigour of this harm was never vain, and that my wonted prowess I retain. Witness these heaps of slaughter on the plain," he said, and doubtful of his former deeds, to some trial of his force proceeds. He chose Metamorphoses from among the rest. At him he launched his spear, and pierced his breast. On the hard earth the Lycian knocked his head, and lay supine, and forth the spirit fled. Then thus the hero, "Neither can I blame the hand or javelin, both are the same I employ against this foe, and wish but with the same success to throw." So spoke the chief, and while he spoke he threw. The weapon with unerring fury flew. At his left shoulder aimed, nor entrance found, but back as from a rock, with swift rebound. Harmless returned, a bloody mark appeared, which with false joy the flattered hero cheered. Wound there was none. The blood that was in view, the lance before from slain Metamorphoses that drew. Headlong he leaps from off his lofty car, and in close fight on foot renews the war. Raging with high disdain, repeats his blows, nor shield nor armour can their fierce oppose. Huge cantlets of his buckler strew the ground, and no defence in his bored arms is found. But on his flesh no wound or blood is seen. The sword is itself blunted on the skin. This vain attempt the chief no longer bears, but round his hollow temples and his ears his buckler beats. The son of Neptune, stunned with these repeated buffets, quits his ground. A sickly sweat succeeds, and shades of night. Inverted nature swims before his sight. The insulting victor presses on the more, and treads the steps the vanquished trod before, nor rest nor respite gives. A stone there lay behind his trembling foe, and stopped his way. Achilles took the advantage which he found, overturned and pushed him backward on the ground. His buckler held him under, while he pressed with both his knees above his panting breast. Unlaced his helm, about his chin the twist he tied, and soon the strangled soul dismissed. With eager haste he went to strip the dead. The vanished body from his arms was fled. His sea-god sire, to immortalize his frame, had turned it to a bird that bears his name. A truce succeeds the labours of this day, and arms suspended with a long delay. While Trojan walls are kept with watch and ward, the Greeks before their trenches mount the guard. The feast approached, when to the blue-eyed maid his vows for Cygnus slain the victor paid, and a white heifer on her altar laid. The reeking entrails on the fire they threw, and to the gods the grateful odour flew. Heaven had its part in sacrifice. The rest was broiled and roasted for the future feast. The chief invited guests were set around, and hunger first assuaged, the bowls were crowned, which in deep draughts their cares and labours drowned. The mellow harp did not their ears employ, and mute was all the war. Like symphony, discourse, the food of souls, was their delight, and pleasing chat prolonged the summer's night. The subject deed of arms and valour shown, or on the Trojan side, or on their own, of dangers undertaken, fames achieved. They talked by turns, the talk by turns relieved. What things but these could fierce Achilles tell, or what could fierce Achilles hear so well? The last great act performed, of Cygnus slain, did most the martial audience entertain, wondering to find a body free by fate from steel, which could even that steel rebate. Amazed their admiration they renew, and scarce Pelides could believe it true. The story of Caenis. Then Nestor thus, what once this age has known, in fated Cygnus and in him alone, these eyes have seen in Caenis long before, whose body not 1,000 swords could bore. Caenis in courage and in strength excelled, and still his authoress with his fame is filled. But what did this most his martial deeds adorn, though since he changed his sex, a woman born? A novelty so strange and full of fate, his listening audience asked him to relate. Achilles thus commends their common suit. O father, first for prudence and repute, tell with that eloquence so much thine own, what thou hast heard, or what of Caenis known. What was he? Whence his change of sex begun? What trophies joined in wars with thee he won? Who conquered him? And in what fatal strife the youth without a wound could lose his life? Neleides then, though tardy age and time, have shrunk my sinews and decayed my prime. Though much I have forgotten of my store, yet not exhausted, I remember more of all that arms achieved or peace designed. That action still is fresher in my mind than aught beside. If reverend age can give to faith a sanction, in my third I live. 'Twas in my 2nd century I surveyed young Caenis, then a fair Thessalian maid. Caenis the bright was born to high command, a princess and a native of thy land. Divine Achilles every tongue proclaimed her beauty, and her eyes all hearts inflamed. Peleus thy sire perhaps had sought her bed among the rest, but he had either led thy mother then, or was by promise tied, but she to him, and all alike her love denied. It was her fortune once to take her way along the sandy margin of the sea. The power of ocean viewed her as she passed, and loved as soon as seen by force embraced. So fame reports. his virgin treasure seized, and his new joys the ravisher so pleased, that thus, transported to the nymph, he cried, "Ask what thou wilt, no prayer shall be denied." This also fame relates, the haughty fair, who not the rape even of a god could bear, this answer proud returned: "To mighty wrongs a mighty recompense of right belongs. Give me no more to suffer such a shame, but change the woman for a better name. One gift for all," she said, and while she spoke, a stern, majestic, manly tone she took. A man she was, and as the godhead swore, to Caenis turned, who Caenis was before. To this the lover adds without request, no force of steel should violate his breast. Glad of the gift, the new-made warrior goes, and arms among the Greeks, and longs for equal foes. The skirmish between the Centaurs and the Lapithites. Now, brave Perithous, bold Ixion's son, the love of fair Hippodame had won. The cloud-begotten race, half man, half beast, invited, came to grace the nuptial feast. In a cool cave's recess the treat was made, whose entrance trees with spreading boughs o'ershade. They sate, and summoned by the bridegroom came, to mix with those the Lapithian name. Nor wanted I. The roofs with joy resound, and Hymen, Io Hymen, rung around. Raised altar shone with holy fires. The bride, lovely herself, and lovely by her side, a bevy of bright nymphs with sober grace, came glittering like a star, and took her place. Her heavenly form beheld, all wished her joy, and little wanted, but in vain their wishes all employ. For one, most brutal of the brutal brood, of whether wine or beauty fired his blood, or both at once, beheld with lustful eyes, the bride at once resolved to make his prize. Down went the board, and fastening on her hair, he seized with sudden force the frightened fair. 'Twas Eurystheus began, his bestial kind his crime pursued, and each as pleased his mind, of her whom chance presented took. The feast, an image of a taken town expressed. The cave resounds with female shrieks. We rise, mad with revenge, to make a swift reprise. And Theseus first, what frenzy had possessed? "O Eurystheus," he cried, "thy brutal beast to wrong Perithous, and not him alone, but while I live, two friends conjoined in one." To justify his threat, he thrusts aside the crowd of centaurs, and redeems the bride. The monster naught replied, for words were vain, and deeds could only deeds unjust maintain, but answers with his hand and forward pressed, with blows redoubled on his face and breast. An ample goblet stood, of antique mould, and rough with figures of the rising gold. The hero snatched it up, and tossed it in air, full at the front of the foul ravisher. He falls, and falling vomits forth a flood of wine, and foam, and brains, and mingled blood. Half roaring and half neighing through the hall, "Arms, arms, the double formed with fury call, to wreak with their brother's death, a medley flight of bowls and jars, at first supply the fight. Once instruments of feast, but now of fate, wine animates their rage, and arms their hate. Bold Amycus from the robbed vestry brings the chalices of heaven, and holy things of precious weight, a sconce that hung on high, with tapers filled to light the sacristy. Torn from the cord with his unhallowed hand, he threw amid the Lapithian band. On Celadon the ruin fell, and left his face of feature and of form bereft. So, when some brawny sacrificer knocks before an altar led, an offered ox, his eyeballs rooted out are thrown to ground, his nose dismantled, his mouth is found, his jaws, cheeks, front, one undistinguished wound. This, belates the avenger, could not brook, but by foot a maple board he took, and hurled at Amycus. His chin it bent against his chest, and down the centaur sent, whom sputtering bloody teeth the second blow of his drawn sword dispatched to shades below. Caenis was near and cast a furious look on the side altar, censed with sacred smoke, and bright with flaming fires. "The gods," he cried, "have with their holy tirade our hands supplied. Why use not their gifts?" Then from the floor an altar stone he heaved, with all the load it bore. Altar and altar's freight together slew, where thickest thronged the Lapithian crew. And at once Proteus and Oreus flew. Oreus' mother, Mycale, was known down from her sphere to draw the labouring moon. Exadius cried, "Unpunished shall not go this fact if arms are found against the foe." He looked about, where on a pine were spread the votive horns of a stag's branching head. At Caenis these he throwed. So just they fly that the sharp antlers stuck in either eye. Breathless and blind he fell, with blood besmeared. His eyeballs beaten out, hung dangling on his beard. Fierce Rhotus from the hearth a burning brand selects, and whirling waves, till from his hand the fire took flame, then dashed it from the right, on fair Charaxus's temples near the site. The whistling pest came on and pierced the bone, and caught the yellow hair and shriveled while it shone. Caught like dry stubble fired, or like sear wood. Yet from the wound ensued no purple flood, but looked a bubbling mass of frying blood. His blazing locks sent forth a crackling sound, and hissed like red-hot iron within the smithy drowned. The wounded warrior shook his flaming hair. Then, what a team of horse could hardly rear? He heaves the threshold stone, but could not throw. The weight itself forbade the threatened blow, which dropping from his lifted arms came down full on Cometes' head, and crushed his crown. Nor Rhotus then retained his joy, but said, "So by their fellows may our foes be sped." Then with redoubled strokes he plies his head. The burning lever not deludes his pains, but drives the battered skull within the brains. Thus flushed, the conqueror with force renewed, Evagrius, Corythus, Dryas pursued. First Corythus with downy cheeks he slew, whose fall when fierce Evagrius had in view, he cried, "What palm is from a beardless prey?" Rhotus prevents what more he had to say, and drove within his mouth the fiery death, which entered hissing in and choked his breath. At Dryas next he flew, but wearied chance no longer would the same success advance. For while he whirled in fiery circles round, the brand, a sharpened stake, strong Dryas found, and in the shoulder's joint inflicts the wound. The weapon stuck, which, roaring out with pain, he drew. Nor longer durst the fight maintain, but turned his back for fear and fled amain. With him fled Orneus, with like dread possessed, Thaumas and Medon wounded in the breast, and Murmurus in the late race renowned, now limping ran, and tardy with his wound. Pholus and Melanius from fight withdrew, and Abus maimed, who Boars encountering slew. And augur Asbalus, whose art in vain from fight dissuaded the four-footed train, now beat the hoof with Nessus on the plain. But to his fellow cried, "Be safely slow, thy death deferred is due to great Alcidius' bow." Meantime, strong Dryas urged his chance so well that Lycidas, Areos, Imbrius fell, all one by one fighting face to face. Cranius fled to fall with more disgrace, for fear while he looked behind he bore betwixt his nose and front, and the blow before. Amid the noise and the tumult of the fray, snoring and drunk with wine, Aphidas lay. Even then the bowl within his hand he kept, and on a bear's rough hide securely slept. Him Phorbus with his flying dart transfixed. "Take thy next draught with Stygian waters mixed, and sleep thy fill," the insulting victor cried. Surprised with death unfelt, the centaur died. The ruddy vomit as he breathed his soul repassed his throat, and filled his empty bowl. I saw Patrius' arms employed around a well-grown oak to root it from the ground. This way and that he wrenched the fibrous bands. The trunk was like a sapling in his hands, and still obeyed the bend, while thus he stood. Pirithous' dart drove on and nailed him to the wood. Lycus and Chromis fell by him oppressed. Helops and Dictys added to the rest. A nobler palm, Helops, through either ear transfixed, received the penetrating spear. This Dictys saw, and seized with sudden fright, leaped headlong from the hill of steepy height, and crushed an ash beneath that could not bear his weight. The shattered tree receives his fall, and strikes within his full-blown paunch the sharpened spikes. Strong Aphorus, though heaved a mighty stone, the fragment of a rock, and would have thrown, but Theseus, with a club of hardened oak, the cubit bone of the old Centaur broke, and left him maimed, nor seconded the stroke. Then leapt on tall Bionor's back, who bore no mortal burden but his own before. Pressed with his knees, his sides the double man, his speed with spurs increased, unwilling ran. One hand the hero fastened on his locks, his other plied him with repeated strokes. The club round his ears and battered brows he falls, and lashing up his heels his rider throws. The same Herculean arms Nedminus wound, and lay by him Lycatus on the ground. And Hippasus, whose beard his breast invades, and Ripheus, haunter of the woodland shades, and Thereus, used with mountain bears to strive, and from their dens to draw the indignant beast alive. Demoleon could not bear this hateful sight, or the long fortune of the Athenian knight, but pulled with all his force to disengage from earth a pine, the product of an age. The root stuck fast. The broken trunk he sent at Theseus. Theseus frustrates his intent and leaps aside. By Pallas warned the blow to shun, for so he said, and we believed it so. Yet not in vain the enormous weight was cast, which Crantor's body sundered at the waist. Thy father's squire Achilles, and his care, whom conquered in the Pelopian war, their king, his present ruin to prevent, a pledge of peace implored, to Peleus sent. Thy sire with grieving eyes beheld his fate, and cried, Not long, love Crantor, shalt thou wait thy vowed revenge. At once he said, and threw his ashen spear, which quivered as it flew, with all his force, and all his soul applied. The sharp point entered in the Centaur's side. Both hands to wrench it out the monster joined, and wrenched it out, but left the steel behind. Stuck in his lungs it stood, enraged he rears his hoofs, and down to ground thy father bears. Thus trampled underfoot, his shield defends his head, his other hand the lance portends. Even while he lay extended on the dust, he sped the centaur with one single thrust. Two more his lance before transfixed from far, and two his sword had slain in closer war. To these was added Doralus, who spread a bull's two goring horns around his head. With these he pushed, and blood already died. Him fearless I approached, and thus defied. Now, monster, now, by proof it shall appear whether thy horns are sharper or my spear. At this I threw, for want of other ward. He lifted up his hand, his front to guard. His hand it passed, and fixed it to his brow. Loud shouts of ours attend the lucky blow. Him Peleus finished with a second wound, which, through the navel pierced, he reeled around, and dragged his dangling bowels on the ground. Trod what he dragged, and what he trod he crushed, and to his mother earth with empty belly rushed. The story of Silurus and Hylonomy. Nor could thy form, O Silurus, foreflow thy fate, if form to monsters men allow. Just bloomed thy beard of golden hue, thy locks in golden waves above thy shoulders flew. Sprightly thy look, thy shapes in every part, so clean as might instruct the sculptor's art. As far as man extended, where began the beast was equal to the man. Add but a horse's head and neck, and he, O Castor, was a courser worthy thee. So was his back proportioned for the seat, so rose his brawny chest, so swiftly moved his feet. Coal black his color, but like jet it shone. His legs and flowing tail were white alone. Beloved by many maidens of his kind, but fair Hylonomy possessed his mind. Hylonomy for features and for face, excelling all the nymphs of double race. Nor less her blandishments than beauty move, at once both loving and confessing love. For For him she dressed, for him with female care she combed and set in curls her auburn hair, of roses, violets, and lilies mixed, and sprigs of flowing rosemary betwixt. She formed the chaplet and adorned her front in waters of the Pegasean fount, and in the streams that from the fountain play she washed her face and bathed her twice a day. The scarf of furs that hung below her side was ermine, or the panther-spotted pride. Spoils of no common beast with equal flame they loved. Their sylvan pleasures were the same. All day they hunted, and when day expired, together to some shady cave retired, invited to the nuptials both repair, and side by side they both engage in war. Uncertain from what hand a flying dart at Silurus was sent, which pierced his heart. The javelin drawn from out the mortal wound, he faints with staggering steps and seeks the ground. The fair within her arms received his fall, and strove his wandering spirits to recall. And while her hand, the streaming blood opposed, joined face to face his lips with hers, she closed. Stifled with kisses, a sweet death he dies. She fills the field with undistinguished cries. At least her words were in her clamour drowned, for my stunned ears received no vocal sound. In madness of her grief, she seized the dart new drawn and reeking from her lover's heart. To her bare bosom the point sharp applied, and wounded fell, and falling by his side, embraced him in her arms, and thus, embracing, died. Even still, methinks, I see Theocomes. Strange was his habit, as odd his dress. 6 lions' hides with thongs together fast, his upper part defended to his waist, and where man ended the continued vest, spread on his back the house and trappings of a beast. A stump too heavy for a team to draw, it seems a fable, though the fact I saw. He threw at Folan the descending blow, divides the skull and cleaves his head in two. The brains from nose and mouth and either ear came issuing out, as through a colander, the curdled milk, or from press the whey, driven down by weight above, is drained away. But him, while stooping down to spoil the slain, pierced through the paunch I tumbled on the plain. Then Chthonius and Telebous I slew. A fork the former armed, a dart his fellow threw. The javelin wounded me. Behold the scar. Then was my time to seek the Trojan War. Then I was Hector's match in open field, but he was then unborn, at least a child. Now I am nothing. I forbid to tell by Periphantus how Peritus fell, the centaur by the night. Nor will I stay on Amphix, or what deaths he dealt that day. What honour, with a pointless lance he won, stuck in the front of a 4-footed man. What fame young Machaerus obtained in fight, or dwell on Nisus, now returned from flight. How prophet Mopsus not alone divined, whose valour equalled his foreseeing mind. Caenis transformed to an eagle. Already Caenis with his conquering hand had slaughtered 5, the boldest of their band. Paracamus, Helymus, Antimachus, Bromus the brave, and the stronger Stiphylos. Their names I numbered and remember well. No trace remaining, what wounds they fell. Latreus, the bulkiest of the double race, whom the spoiled arms of slain hailed this grace. In years retaining still his youthful might, though his black hairs were interspersed with white, betwixt the embattled ranks began to prance, proud of his helm and Macedonian lance, and rode the ring around that either host might hear him, while he made this empty boast. And from a strumpet shall we suffer shame? For Canis still, not Caenis, is thy name, and still the native softness of thy kind prevails, and leaves the woman in thy mind. Remember what thou wert, what price was paid to change thy sex, to make thee not a maid, but a man in show. Go, card and spin, and leave the business of the war to men. While thus the boaster exercised his pride, the fatal spear of Caenis reached his side. Just in the mixture of the kinds it ran, betwixt the neither beast and upper man. The monster, mad with rage and stung with smart, his lance directed at the hero's heart. It struck, but bounded from his hardened breast, like hail from tiles which the safe house invest. nor seemed the stroke with more effect to come than a small pebble falling on a drum. He next his falchion tried in closer fight, but the keen falchion had no power to bite. He thrust. The blunted point returned again. Since downright blows, he cried, and thrusts are vain, I'll prove his side, and stronger embraces held. He proved his side the sword repelled. His hollow belly echoed to the stroke, untouched his body as a solid rock. Aimed at his neck at last, the blade in shivers broke. The impassive knight stood idle to deride his rage, and offered oft his naked side. At length, now, monster, in thy turn, he cried, try thou the strength of Caenis. At the word he thrust, and in his shoulder plunged the sword. Then writhed his hand, and as he drove it down deep in his breast, made many wounds in one. The Centaur's sword enraged the unhoped success, and rushing on in crowds together press. At him and him alone their darts they threw. Repulsed they from his fated body flew. Amazed they stood, till Monachus began, O shame, a nation conquered by a man! O woman man, yet more a man is he than all our race, and what he was are we. Now, what avail our nerves, the united force of the two the strongest creatures, man and horse? Nor goddess born, nor of Ixian seed we seem, a lover built for Juno's bed, mastered by this half-man. Whole mountains throw with woods at once, and bury him below. This only way remains, nor need we doubt to choke the soul within, though not to force it out. Heap weights instead of wounds. He chanced to see where southern storms had rooted up a tree. This raised from earth against the foe he threw. The example shown, his fellow brutes pursue. With forest loads the warrior they invade. Otherus and Pelion soon were void of shade, and spreading groves were naked mountains made. Pressed with the burden, Caenis pants for breath, and on his shoulders bears the wooden death. To heave the intolerable weight he tries, at length it rose above his mouth and eyes. Yet still he heaves, and struggling with despair, shakes all aside and gains a gulp of air, a short relief, which but prolongs his pain. He faints by fits, and then respires again. At last the burden only nods above, as when an earthquake stirs the Edian grove. Doubtful his death, he suffocated seemed to most, but otherwise our mopes esteemed, who saw, he said, a yellow bird arise from out the piles and cleave the liquid skies. I saw it too, with golden feathers bright, nor e'er before beheld so strange a sight. Who Mopsus viewing as it soared around our troop, and heard the pinions rattling sound. All hail, he cried, thy country's grace and love, once first of men below, now first of birds above. Its authors to the story gave belief, for us our courage was increased by grief. Ashamed to see a single man pursued with odds to sink beneath a multitude, we pushed the foe, and forced to shameful flight, part fell, and part escaped by favor of the night. The fate of Periclymenus. This tale by Nestor told, nor did much displease Telepolemus, the seed of Hercules. For often he had heard his father say that he himself was present at the fray, and more than shared the glories of the day. Old Chronicle, he said among the rest, you might have named Alcides at least. Is he not worthy of your praise? The Pylian prince sighed ere he spoke, then made his proud defence. My former woes in long oblivion drowned I would have lost, but you renew the wound. Better to pass him o'er than to relate the cause I have your mighty sire to hate. His fame has filled the world and reached the sky, which, oh, I wish with truth I could deny. We praise not Hector, though his name we know is great in arms. 'Tis hard to praise a foe. He your great father levelled to the ground, Messinia's towers nor better fortune found, Elis and Pylos that a neighbouring state, and this my own both guiltless of their fate. To pass the rest, 12 wanting one he slew, my brethren, who their birth from Neleus drew. All youths of early promise had they lived. By him they perished, I alone survived. The rest were easy conquest, but the fate of Periclymenus is wondrous to relate. To him, our common grandsire of the main had given to change his form, and change resume again. Varied at best every shape he tried, and in all beast Alcides still defied. Vanquished on earth at length he soared above, changed to the bird that bears the bolt of Jove. The new dissembled eagle now endued with beak and pounces, Hercules pursued, and cuffed his manly cheeks and tore his face, then safe retired and toured in empty space. Alcides bore not his flying foe, but bending his inevitable bow, reached him in air suspended as he stood, and in his pinion fixed the feathered wood. Light was the wound, but in the sinew hung the point, and his disabled wing unstrung. He wheeled in air and stretched his vans in vain. His vans no longer could his flight sustain, for while one gathered wind, one unsupplied, hung drooping down, nor poised his other side. He fell. The shaft that slightly was impressed, now from his heavy fall with weight increased, drove through his neck aslant, he spurns the ground, and the soul issues through the weazen's wound. Now, brave commander of the Rhodian seas, what praise is due from me to Hercules? Silence is all the vengeance I decree for my slain brothers, but 'tis peace with thee. Thus, with a flowing tongue, old Nestor spoke, then to full bowls each other they provoke. At length, with weariness and wine oppressed, they rise from the table and withdraw to rest. The death of Achilles. The sire of Cygnus, monarch of the main, meantime laments his son in battle slain, and vows the victor's death, nor vows in vain. For 9 long years the smothered pain he bore. Achilles was not ripe for fate before. Then, when he saw the promised hour was near, he thus spoke the god that guides the year. Immortal offspring of my brother Jove, my brightest nephew, and whom best I love, whose hands were joined with mine to raise the wall of tottering Troy, now nodding to her fall. Dost thou not mourn our power employed in vain, and the defenders of our city slain? To pass the rest could noble Hector lie unpitied, dragged about his native Troy. And yet the murderer lives, himself by far a greater plague than all the wasteful war. He lives. The proud Pelides lives, to boast our town destroyed, our common labour lost. Oh, could I meet him, but I wish, too late, to prove my trident is not in his fate. But let him try, for that's allowed thy dart, and pierces only penetrable part. Apollo bows to the superior throne, and to his uncle's anger adds his own. Then in a cloud involved he takes his flight, where Greeks and Trojans mixed in mortal fight, and found out Paris lurking where he stood, and stained his arrows with plebeian blood. Phoebus to him alone the god confessed. Then to the recreant knight he thus addressed: Dost thou not blush to spend thy shafts in vain on a degenerate and ignoble train? If fame or better vengeance be thy care, there aim, and with one arrow end the war. He said, and showed from far the blazing shield and sword, which but Achilles none could wield, and how he moved a god and mowed the standing field. The deity himself directs aright the envenomed shaft, and wings the fatal flight. Thus fell the foremost of the Grecian name, and he, the base adulterer, boasts the fame, a spectacle to glad the Trojan train, and please old Priam after Hector slain. If by female hand he had foreseen he was to die, he wish had rather been the lance and double axe the fair warrior queen. And now the terror of the Trojan field, the Grecian honour, ornament, and shield, high on a pile the unconquered chief is placed. The god that armed him first, consumed at last. Of all the mighty man the small remains, a little urn, and scarcely filled contains. Yet, great in Homer, still Achilles lives, and equal to himself survives. His buckler owns its former lord, and brings new cause of strife betwixt contending kings. Who worthiest after him his sword to wield? Even Diomed sat mute, with downcast eyes, conscious of wanted worth to win the prize. Nor Menelaus presumed these arms to claim, nor he, the king of men, a greater name. 2 rivals only rose, Laertes' son, and the vast bulk of Ajax Telamon, the king who cherished each with equal love, and from himself all envy would remove, left both to be determined by the laws, and to the Grecian chiefs transferred the cause.